Okay, Rob, thank you. Let's go live now to Liberal MP Tim Wilson. Tim, good to see you. Thanks for joining us this morning. So the government last week announced its four-stage plan, but there's no timeline. Doesn't give anyone any certainty, does it?
Well, I disagree with that. What we have is a timeline now which gives a clear indicator of what happens.
There's no timeline.
No, we have a clear four-stage plan which said if we meet benchmarks that we will transition now. I think the next stage now that we've got common agreement among state premiers is to outline the thresholds or triggers that will be met. And of course, because it should be focused on encouraging and incentivising Australians to go out and get the vaccine. And so I think if we introduce those triggers, it'll very clearly give an outline to Australians about how we can get to a new COVID normal.
But you mentioned the word premiers there. They are the ones who still call the shots, though, aren't they?
Well, of course they are. We live in a federation and we should have competitive federalism where decisions are made closest to people they serve. But our role as the federal government is to bring them together, to get them focused on what we need to do to open Australian up, and having trigger points that implement the different stages of the plan will focus their minds, but also, frankly, hold them accountable to the citizens that they're currently keeping in lockdown.
The government, though, still can't answer the question of when those under the age of 40 can go and get a Pfizer jab. So where's the clarity there?
Well, people are going to get them against stages as we we vaccinate other sections of the population. We've gone quite deliberately from the most vulnerable to the less vulnerable in terms of the risks of COVID-19. And as soon as we get the supply, we want people vaccinated. And so that's why those trigger points about moving through the different stages are so critical.
Well, I mean, you've got to admit, though, there's some confusion, particularly amongst the under 40s. They're facing this decision at the moment. Well, should I go out and get an AstraZeneca jab, bearing in mind there's going to be 12 weeks in between two shots, or should I wait for Pfizer, even though there's no date, because there's a much shorter time frame in between the two shots? So there's a lot of confusion there too.
Well, that isn't the only consideration, of course. Going back and looking through your previous medical history is an important basis to make the decision about which one you get. But I always took the view as soon as I could get one, I would get one. I would have preferred AstraZeneca, frankly, but because I got it before the ruling, I got Pfizer. But the most important thing is go and talk to your doctor, be informed, and ultimately, the sooner people get vaccinated, whether it's 3 weeks or 12 weeks between doses, the more likely it is we're going to be able to trigger those points, move through the stages and get to a COVID normal.
Innes Willox makes the point this morning that everyone should be offered a vaccine rather than there being this big magic number that everyone's talking about at the moment. Otherwise, we are hostage to vaccine hesitancy and deniers. That's what he says this morning. What do you make of those comments? Do you agree with him?
I understand the sentiment he's making, and my hope is that Australians will show responsibility and go out and get a vaccine. But I don't think we should be operating on the idea of getting 100% vaccination rates, because we know that we'll be then hostage to people who choose not to be.
Yeah.
I think we've got to be sensible. I think we've got to be proportionate. And in the end, we've got to set thresholds that actively incentivise people, both because they can be met, but equally that people have to accept responsibility for themselves and our fellow Australians and understand that there are real consequences. The choice ultimately, long-term, is not between not having COVID-19 or a vaccine. It's a choice between a vaccine and what ultimately people will face, which is a choice about the spread part of the virus as we open up.
So what is sensible? What is proportionate?
Well, I think we've got to, I reckon, frankly, if we're going to move past the first target, it's got to be somewhere around, past the first stage, it's got to be around 60%. And then we've got to keep moving from there. But the objective should clearly be that people have a responsibility to themselves, they have a responsibility to their fellow citizens, and as they meet that threshold, that then the cost ratio moves in favour of getting vaccinated for those who are more wary.
Gladys Berejiklian has already identified a target of 80%. Do you think that's too high?
If I recall, that was on the basis that we go to international arrivals. That isn't the basis of the four-stage plan. I'm talking about the first stage, and I think it's got to be lower than that. And
Tony Blakey, the epidemiologist on our show this morning, he agrees with you on that front. He said it could be around 60 to 70%, but it's got to be an entire package. So you've got to have your contact tracing that is going to continue, and so people have to take on a lot of the responsibility themselves as well before we move to another stage. Is that something you agree with too?
Well, people do have to take responsibility and the systems need to be in place. But if we're going to go from move to the first stage and then on to the second stage, you've got to have realistic targets which are set, understanding that it encourages people to get vaccinated so they can be met. But in addition to that, that there is a practical reality for those who choose not to be, that they are obviously taking a serious risk with their health.
And do you think kids have got to be included in the mix too by getting vaccinated?
I'll leave that to medical professionals to make that decision. But it would seem to me that we're to date been focused mostly on Australians of adult age. And of course, we know that different variants have different impacts. So that will be obviously dependent on changing circumstances.
OK. Tim Wilson, good to have you with us. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Pete.